Hi, in this video we're going to look at the endocrine system organs and what the hormones are that they secrete and what those hormones are doing. So the endocrine system is a little bit different than, say, the cardiovascular system or the respiratory system, in that the organs are kind of spread throughout the body and they have a very diverse set of properties or things that they're regulating. So it's a little bit different where you don't see the interconnections that you would normally see with those other systems. All right, first let's look at the endocrine system organs and classify them either as a primary endocrine gland or a secondary endocrine gland. Primary endocrine glands are going to be those that really the main primary or only function of them is for them to function as an endocrine gland. These include things like the pituitary gland, or at least part of the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the adrenal gland, and the pineal gland. The secondary endocrine glands are really going to be a lot of different organs in your body that are going to have a diverse set of functions in addition to their hormone production. So things like the pancreas, the hypothalamus, the thymus, heart, kidney, stomach, small intestine, liver, skin, ovaries, testes, adipose, bone, all of these things have other functions that they do in addition to secreting their endocrine hormones. All right, so let's take a look at these in detail, noting what the major endocrine organs and tissues are, what their products are, and what their targets are. So let's start with the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is going to be closely associated with the hypothalamus. And we really view this hypothalamus pituitary gland combination as the control center of the endocrine system, because it is going to produce a lot of different hormones that ultimately are going to be regulating other endocrine glands. The hypothalamus is inferior and anterior to the thalamus. So if we look over at this image here, this is the thalamus. And this little teal color structure, that is the hypothalamus. And so if we note, that is the thalamus, this is the hypothalamus. It has both neural, meaning functions in the nervous system, as well as endocrine functions. Since we're talking about the endocrine system, we're going to be focused on the endocrine functions of the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is going to be this structure that suspends from the hypothalamus. So it's suspended by this orange structure known as the infundibulum. The pituitary gland is going to be divided into an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary stores and secrete hormones that are actually made by the hypothalamus, while the anterior pituitary is going to make its own hormones, but we're going to have a portal system here that is actually going to deliver hormones that the hypothalamus makes that regulates the secretion of these hormones. So I'll come back to that. The endocrine system, if we look at the posterior pituitary gland via the hypothalamus, there are going to be two hormones that are of note here. So we have oxytocin. Oxytocin is going to target the uterus and the breast, where it stimulates uterine contractions and helps to initiate breast milk. The other hormone is the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Its target is going to be the kidneys, and it's going to stimulate water reabsorption from the urine back into the blood. Thus the term antidiuretic, because a diuretic is something that increases the urine output. So antidiuretic is going to decrease urine output because it results in water reabsorption. The anterior pituitary gland is going to have a variety of different hormones that it secretes, many of them being tropic hormones. So one hormone is the growth hormone. It's going to target the liver, muscle, bone, cartilage, as well as many other bone or other tissues of the body. Its function is really going to regulate growth. So it increases blood glucose and fat breakdown and stimulates growth. Increasing blood glucose and fat breakdown is going to help with the stimulation of growth because it provides the fuel for that. The second hormone that we'll talk about is the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. It targets the thyroid gland and leads to the release of thyroid hormones. Then we have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. Adreno indicates that it is going to target the adrenal gland. Specifically, it's going to target the cortex. So that's where the adrenocortico part comes from. Tropic means that it's going to be stimulating hormone release from those. So it releases the corticoids, the glucocorticoids and the gonatocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. All right, more on the anterior pituitary. We have the follicle stimulating hormone. It targets the ovaries and testes, where it's going to stimulate ovarian follicle maturation and production of estrogen. Also is going to stimulate sperm production. Luteinizing hormone also targets the ovaries and testes, triggers ovulation, and stimulates production of estrogens, promotes testosterone production. And prolactin targets the breast and promotes lactation. So these are all hormones that are going to be targeting your sex or secondary sex characteristics. All right, let's go back to that one that I skipped over since I had my slides out of order. All right, so this is the pineal gland. The pineal gland, ignore this red drawing right here, is this structure right here. It's named pineal, so you notice the term pine in it. So it is a pine cone shaped gland. It's unpaired and found at the midline of the brain. Generally, it has a reddish or gray color and is about the size of just a single grain of rice in humans, at least. It is part of a structure that is known as the epithalamus. So we have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and now we have the epithalamus, which we're going to find above the thalamus. It's going to be connected to the rest of the brain by a pineal stalk. And the pineal stalk is going to connect to the posterior commissure and the habenular commissure. The pineal gland is going to produce melatonin. It targets the hypothalamus, so boom, targeting the hypothalamus. And what it does here is it is going to target a specific nucleus that ultimately is going to be involved in the regulation of sleep and circadian rhythm. All right. So now let's look at the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland is going to be found just below the voice box, the larynx, and wrapping around the trachea. On the anterior side, it's going to be attached at the midline, while posteriorly, if you would look at it, it doesn't completely wrap around. So the thyroid gland is going to produce two hormones known as T3 and T4. These are going to target the mitochondria of body cells, where they will lead to an increased basal metabolic rate. Closely associated with the thyroid gland are the parathyroid glands. So we can see them as sort of islands within the thyroid gland itself. So you can see four of them right here. They're essentially going to be mirrored on the two lobes of them. They produce a hormone that is known as parathyroid hormone, or PTH. It targets the bone and the kidneys and helps by increasing blood calcium levels by stimulating osteoclast activity, calcium reabsorption, and calcitriol release. All right. So if we look at the regulation of parathyroid hormone, it is going to be very sensitive to the levels of calcium. So you have a precise blood calcium concentration that your body is monitoring. So calcium has a lot of different roles. Obviously, it is an important structural component of bone, but it's also going to be involved in neuronal signaling, muscle contraction, etc. And so you need to have a steady calcium rate or calcium volume or concentration in the blood. So if you have an increased calcium in the blood, this is going to be sensed by the parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland is going to start to secrete calcitonin. So this is actually something that the parafollicular cells of the thyroid are going to be secreting. So I kind of skipped over that before. In addition to T3 and T4, you also have calcitonin. Calcitonin is going to stimulate the osteoblast. The PTH here is going to drop, so you have less of this in the blood. Therefore, the osteoclast activity is going to decrease. So you have less osteoclast activity going on here. And thus, you are essentially going to be taking calcium from the blood and putting it into the bone. So that leads to a return to homeostasis and returning calcium levels. Now, let's say calcium levels fall. They are going to trigger the parathyroid glands here to secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone then is going to have a couple of different effects. So first of all, it's going to start stimulating the osteoclast activity, inhibiting the osteoblast activity. So this is going to help return calcium to the blood from the bone, to help return calcium back to the concentrations in the blood that you want it to. In addition to that, they're going to do a couple of other things. So it's going to act on the kidneys, causing them to produce calcitriol, which results in calcium being returned back into the blood. So that helps to prevent it from being lost into the urine. And it's also going to increase calcium absorption via the calcitriol in the intestines. And so that helps to return calcium back to its normal levels. All right, the thymus is our next endocrine gland. So this was your thyroid gland. Just inferior to it, more down on the trachea, you have the thymus. It's going to secrete a number of different hormones that ultimately lead to T lymphocyte development. So T cells go to the thymus to develop and thus play an important role in immune responses. So we'll talk more about the role of the thymus when we talk about the immune system. All right, this brings us to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are going to release several classes of hormones. So first of all, you have the mineral corticoids like aldosterone. This is going to be a hormone that targets the kidneys and is going to play a role in blood pressure regulation because it plays a role in sodium and potassium homeostasis, which is going to play a role in blood volume, which then plays a role in blood pressure. The glucocorticoids, such as cortisol, they are going to be targeting body cells where they will target gluconeogenesis. So that is the process by which you make glucose from non-carbohydrate precursors, and will promote hyperglycemia, thus aiding in the stress response. So it helps to elevate your blood glucose levels. And then you have the catecholamines, things like epinephrine in particular. Norepinephrine is another catecholamine. They are going to have the target of your, they're going to target the same thing that the sympathetic nervous system is targeting. And because they are going to be targeting these organs and be using essentially the same compounds, acting as a hormone instead of a neurotransmitter, but still chemically the same, it's going to result in the same thing as the sympathetic nervous system activation would have. So if we look at the adrenal gland, we can break it up into the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla, as well as a capsule that goes around them. So that's the capsule around it. We have the cortex here, and then the medulla is sort of the center of it. So here you can see several distinct layers. So you have the zona glomerulosa. This is going to be the portion that is going to secrete the mineral corticoids. You have the zona vasculata just deep to that. That secretes the glucocorticoids, things like cortisol. We didn't mention this before because it really plays a minor role, but you have the the gonadocorticoids, such as the androgens. They're going to be secreted by the zona reticularis. Now, the sex organs, ovaries and testes, are going to be much more important in producing these androgens and other sex hormones. So sort of a minor role in that. And then the deepest layer is the adrenal medulla. This is what secretes the catecholamines. All right, so let's take a look at the role that the mineral corticoids are playing in electrolyte concentrations in the blood and thus blood pressure. So we're going to be monitoring both the electrolytes in blood, so things like potassium in blood, which will have a direct effect on the adrenal gland, but you're also monitoring things like blood pressure and volume via the kidneys. So the kidneys sense a drop in blood pressure and volume, causing them to secrete renin. Renin is then going to catalyze the conversion of tensinogen into the angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is then going to be converted into angiotensin 2. So there's several steps going on here that lead to angiotensin 2 that is the direct thing that is acting on the adrenal gland. The angiotensin 2 causes the adrenal gland to release aldosterone, which stimulates the kidney to increase sodium reabsorption and decrease potassium excretion, which helps return you to maintaining homeostasis by increasing blood pressure and volume. In addition to that, stressors can act on the hypothalamus, resulting in the ACTH, adrenal corticotropic hormone release, which is going to have a similar function, leading to increased aldosterone secretion and ultimately increasing blood pressure and blood volume. Conversely, if you have an increase in blood pressure and volume, this is actually going to be sensed by the heart, which is going to release anti-natriuretic hormone, or ANP, that inhibits the adrenal gland, and so the adrenal gland is not going to secrete as much aldosterone. Aldosterone drops, thus decreasing sodium reabsorption and increasing potassium excretion, which then will decrease blood pressure and volume, thus resulting in a change in the blood pressure and blood volume. I just realized, so increased blood potassium, you're going to want to actually increase excretion when you are trying to decrease or increase blood pressure and volume and decrease. So these arrows should have been pointed in the opposite directions. You're decreasing excretion if you have less of this in the blood. So that was a typo on my slides. I apologize for that. All right, stressors. Stressors are going to depend on whether it is an acute or a chronic response. So acute response results in the hypothalamus activating the adrenal medulla. So you have this neural stimulation. So the hypothalamus has neurons that send their axons through the spinal cord, goes through there, connects, and ultimately goes through a motor neuron, which then acts on the adrenal medulla. There, that is going to lead to activation, which secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine. These two hormones are going to have several effects. So they are going to go to the heart and help direct or help increase heart rate and blood pressure to really get blood flowing through the system. It also is going to act on the blood vessels to help direct blood away from non-essential organs. So it goes to things like the muscle and away from things like your digestive and urinary tracts. In the lungs, it's going to increase bronchial dilation. This is going to make it easier to get air flowing into and out of the lungs. And it's going to help liberate blood glucose and increase your metabolic rate, making energy more available. So this helps you respond acutely to stress. Say a lion's chasing you, that's going to increase your stress response. You want to get away from it. These are all things that are going to help you outrun that lion. Now, chronic stress is another problem. So the stressors are going to continue to stimulate the hypothalamus. Now you're going to have activation of the adrenal cortex, not by a neural stimuli, but by hormonal stimuli. So you have these cortisol hormone, or the hormones that are going to cause the the CRH, so cortical releasing hormone, is going to travel to the anterior pituitary, causing adrenocorticotropic hormone to be released, which is going to act on the adrenal cortex, secreting the glucose and mineral corticoids. These then have the effect of increasing blood amino acids, increasing blood glucose, increasing fatty acids. They suppress the immune system and keeps blood pressure elevated. These are all things that are going to be mediated by different body organs, but largely the liver in doing a lot of the metabolic things. Also is going to cause the kidneys to retain sodium and water. So as I said, it keeps blood pressure elevated. That really should belong down with the kidneys because it's increasing blood pressure primarily by retaining sodium and water. This brings us to the pancreas. The pancreas is located partially behind the stomach and the abdomen. It's kind of tadpole shaped. It's a mixed gland having both endocrine and exocrine gland functions. So in digestion, it secretes a lot of things that are going to help with the digestive process, but in the endocrine system, it's going to secrete several different hormones that are going to be important in glucose homeostasis. So the glucose homeostasis is primarily going to be regulated by glucagon and insulin. Glucagon, so we have some exocrine cells that are known as alpha cells. So these are going to be what produce the glucagon. The insulin is going to be secreted by beta cells. So these are both going to target the liver. Insulin targets other cells as well, and they have opposite effects. So glycogenolysis, so increase the breakdown of glycogen. Gluconeogenesis, increase the synthesis of new glucose molecules, both of those combining to increase blood glucose levels. Conversely, insulin is going to decrease the process of glycogenolysis, stimulating glycogenesis instead. So you're taking the glucose and putting it into the liver as glycogen. Also promotes glucose uptake in these different cells that I mentioned earlier, the liver, muscle cells, and adipocytes. Adipocytes, you're going to store the glycogen or glucose as fat cells or fat triglycerides instead of as glycogen, but in the liver and muscle cells, you'll store it as glycogen. There are some other cells that are known as delta cells that are going to secrete the hormone somatostatin. This is an inhibiting hormone which increases the release of both glucagon and insulin. And then you also have PP cells, which account for just a very small percentage of them, secrete, or these cells are thought to play a role in appetites. They secrete pancreatic polypeptide hormone. It's released following a meal and may reduce further food consumption. The two hormones that you should focus on for the pancreas, though, are glucagon and insulin, since those are going to be the major ones that you hear about in most cases when it comes to the pancreas. So let's talk a little bit about glucose regulation. So first of all, you start off with blood glucose levels that should be slightly below 100 milligrams per deciliter if you are fasting in most cases. But let's say you have hyperglycemia because you just had a high carbohydrate meal that elevated your blood glucose levels. So this is going to be sensed by the beta cells of the pancreas, which secrete insulin. Insulin goes into the body where it triggers the body cells to take up glucose and utilize it for different things. Storage is glycogen, breaking it down as cellular respiration, inhibiting gluconeogenesis so that they're not converted into glucose. Instead, all of these things work together to decrease blood glucose concentration, and you return back to your homeostatic levels. Conversely, if you have a drop in blood glucose, so you've been fasting or something strange is going on and now you have low blood glucose levels, this is going to be sensed by alpha cells of the pancreas, which are going to secrete glucagon. Glucagon is going to essentially have the opposite effect. Stimulates glycogenolysis, breaking down the glycogen, stimulates gluconeogenesis, making more glucose molecules, and overall promoting glucose levels to increase in the body. Thus, your blood glucose concentration increases and you return back to homeostasis again. All right, the sex hormones. So these are going to be or the endocrine organs are going to be different in the male and the female. Females are going to have ovaries. These are going to secrete steroid sex hormones, notably estrogen and progesterone. They target reproductive organs as well as other body cells, leading to the maturation of reproductive organs and development of feminine secondary sex characteristics. A temporary organ, the placenta, so this is something that develops during pregnancy. It's going to secrete estrogens, progesterone, and human chorioionic gonadotropin, or HCG. That may be familiar to you as the hormone that pregnancy tests detect, since it's going to be secreted if you become pregnant. So it targets the mother's body, influencing the course of the pregnancy and helping maintain the pregnancy for them. I do want to point out that this is an oversimplification because you do have the estrogens being produced in males and having functions in males, as well as the testosterone being produced in females and having functions in females. But largely, these are the roles that they have. So the testes are going to produce the male sex hormones, testosterone, target male reproductive organs primarily, and overall will initiate male reproductive organ development and ultimately stimulate the production of secondary male sex characteristics. The kidneys, so erythropoietin is going to be produced by them. It targets bone marrow, which is going to increase the synthesis of red blood cells. Also makes renin, which targets the blood, initiating the generation of angiotensin II, which we talked about earlier when we talked about blood pressure regulation and overall the effect that aldosterone is playing in the body. The heart, so this is the word I was struggling with before, atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. It targets the kidneys and the adrenal cortex, where it inhibits sodium ion reabsorption and renin release in the kidneys, having essentially the opposite effect that the renin was having in the body. So it helps to decrease blood pressure. The GI tract is going to secrete a number of different hormones. These generally are going to aid in digestive functions. The liver is going to secrete several different hormones, such as insulin-like growth factor, angiotensinogen, and thrombopoietin. Angiotensinogen, we've talked about prior. It's a precursor to angiotensin II. Thrombopoietin, we'll talk about this when we talk about blood, but it's going to stimulate platelet production, an important component of blood. Insulin-like growth factor, it's going to stimulate body growth, so it can stimulate overall growth characteristics. Bone secretes FGF23 as well as osteocalcin. FGF3 targets the kidneys and parathyroid glands, where it inhibits calcitriol production and increases phosphate excretion, while the osteocalcin is going to help to increase insulin production. We have adipocytes, so your fat cells. They are producing things like leptin and adiponectin. Leptin is going to target the brain, which helps to promote satiety signals. So having more adipocytes, you produce more leptin, and then you become less hungry, is the idea. Now, this can go wrong, and that's part of the reason why we have problems with obesity, is some people can ignore these leptin signals, or their body doesn't respond to leptin like it does in normal situations. Adiponectin targets different body cells that will help reduce insulin resistance in them. And then finally, your skin, it is going to secrete the hormone cholecalciferol, which targets kidneys, hearts, intestine, bones, and liver. This is a modified form of vitamin D that gets converted into its active form. All right, so that was an overview of the endocrine system. Obviously, some of the endocrine organs I spent more time on than others. So the ones that are particularly important are going to be mostly the ones with primary endocrine functions, as well as the pancreas, which has sort of a mixed function, but your thyroid hormones, your pituitary hormones, your adrenal hormones. These are some of the more important ones to know. Your parathyroid hormones. Those of secondary function, those are going to be less emphasized in your class. All right, I will see you next time.